Hello everyone, and welcome to Code for Kids by Kids. And today we're going to be learning Python 2. So once you get onto Code Academy, you then go to the catalog, select Python, and since we aren't paying for the courses, just press free and press Python 2. And the first one that we're going to be doing is Hello World. So what we're doing is Python syntax, and what to do is basically follow the instructions out on them. If programming is the act of teaching a computer to have a conversation with a user, it would be most useful to first teach a computer how to speak. In Python, this is accomplished with the print statement. A print statement is the easiest way to get your Python program to communicate with you. Being able to command this communication will be one of the most valuable tools in your programming toolbox. Use a printing statement, output a message of your choosing to this terminal. So if you're stuck, there's a hint here, and this is how you do it. So print. Usually there'd be brackets in some other language sometimes, but there isn't. So we're just going to do it how it says to. So let's print something that's like hello world, since that's the name of what we're doing. So now that there's hello world, if I run it, it should come up here. And once you're done with that, you can then press next. So now, as you can see, it's showing how to use the brackets. So print. Let's do something else other than hello world. And we can't forget to do the speech marks. So how about we do Python is a programming language. So now that we have that, if we press run, it's now there. What I prefer to do is use Python 3 syntax. Like I prefer to use the brackets. You don't need to though. The brackets are just optional. So now there are strings. When printing things in Python, we are supplying the text block that we want to be printed. Text in Python is considered a specific type of data called a string. A string is so named because there are a series of letters, numbers, or symbols connected in order, as if threaded together by string. Strings can be defined in different ways. Above, we printed two things that are strings and then attempted to print two things that are not strings. While double quotes and single quotes are both acceptable ways to define a string needs to be opened and closed by the same type of quotation mark. So what it's saying is that if I have double speech marks, I can't then do this. As you can see, there's an error. They have to end in the same thing. So now, that's there. We can combine multiple strings using plus, like so. But it shows it here. Print, this is plus a good string. The code will print out, this is a good string. Try adding your name to the print with the plus operator so that this Python program prints hello your name. So I'm going to do what it says I should do. And since my name is Joshua, I can just put Joshua there. And you're able to put your own name there. So instead of just putting it all together, it's going to end up doing that. And also, if I put that way, it will then put it all together. So that's why there's a space there, because now it's going to print it with spaces. Handling errors. As we get more familiar with the Python programming language, we run into errors and exceptions. These are complaints that Python makes when it doesn't understand what you want it to do. Everyone runs into these issues, so it's a good habit to read and understand them. Here are some common errors that we might run into when printing strings. So as you can see here, printing mismatched quotes will cause a syntax error, which I've already shown, and it's also here. And printing without quotes will cause a name error, which is shown here. If the quotes are mismatched, Python will notice this and inform you that your code has an error in its syntax because the line ended called an EOL before the double quote was supposed to close the string appeared. The program will abruptly stop running with the following message. Syntax error. EOL while scanning a string literal. This means that the string wasn't closed or wasn't closed by the same quote character that started it. Another issue you might run into is attempting to create a string without quotes at all. Python treats words not in quotes as commands, like the print statement. If it fails to recognize these words as defined in Python or by a program elsewhere, Python will complain the code has a name error. This means that Python found what it thinks is a command, but doesn't know what it means because it's not defined anywhere. So they've written two print statements with raised errors. One has mismatched quotes and the other has no quotes at all. Fix the two print statements to successfully debug the program. So if we run it, there's an EOL syntax error here because it hasn't actually finished. So if we put it like that, now it's correct. But now on line 2, there's no, it's not a string at all. So I'm going to take this, then add a string, then put it there. So now they're both there. How do you make a hot dog stand? You take away its chair. Well, that's funny. Variables. In Python, when programming in general, we need to build systems for dealing with data that changes over time. That data could be the location of a plane or the time of day, or the television show you're currently watching. The only important thing is that it may be different at different times. Python uses variables to define things that are subject to change. So in this then says greeting message equals welcome to Code Academy. Current exercise equals 5 because it's on number 5. In the above example, we defined a variable called greeting message and set it to equal the string welcome to Code Academy. It is also defined a variable called current exercise and set it to equal to the number 5. And since it's just 5, it's an integer. If it was 5.0, it would then be a float. So those are the different types: string, float, and integer. Create a variable called today's date and assign a value that will represent today's date to that variable. And since today's date is the 11th of February 2023, this is how it's going to look like. So it's going to look like that, and we don't need to put it as a string. I'm pretty sure because these are numbers. So sometimes when it's like that, it has to be like exact. I think I should remove these. So if I do that, it should work. So now it's assigned that value to represent today's date. Arithmetic. One thing computers are capable of doing exceptionally well is performing arithmetic. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and other numeric calculations are easy to do in most programming languages, and Python is no exception. Some examples, these are the ones here. So mirthful addition, that amazing subtraction, trippy multiplication, happy division, sassy combinations. Above are a number of arithmetic operations, each assigned to a variable. The variable will hold the final result of each operation. Combinations of arithmetical operators follow the usual order of operations. Python also offers a companion to division called the modulo operator. The modulo operator is indicated by percent and returns the remainder after division is performed. Is this number odd? 15 divided by 2. Is this number divisible by 7? 133 divided by 7. It's going to then show the remainder. In the above code block, we use the modulo operator to find the remainder of 15 divided by 2. Since 15 is an odd number, the remainder is 1. We also check the remainder of 133 divided by 7. Since 133 divided by 7 has no remainder, it then evaluates to 0. Multiply two numbers together and assign the results to a variable called product. So product. So that's going to be the variable. And the two numbers I'm going to put together are going to be 14 times 6. So I'm also going to print it so that you'll be able to see. So this should then print it. And the product is 84. What is the remainder when 1,398 is divided by 11? Save the result in a variable called remainder. So I'm going to put another variable. Remainder equals 1,398 divided by 11, but it's just going to end up showing it's just going to show the remainder. So, after that, we're going to print it so that we'll be able to see the result. Like if I put a string there, it wouldn't work because it would think it was a string and just print what it says. But instead, it's printing in the variable. Updating variables. Changing the contents of a variable is one of the essential operations. As the flow of a program progresses, data should be updated to reflect changes that have happened. In the above example, we start with 50 fish in the local pond. After catching 10 fish, we update the number of fish in the pond to be the original number of fish in the pond minus the number of fish caught. At the end of this code block, the variable fish caught in pond is equal to 40. Updating a variable by adding or subtracting a number to its original value is such a common task that it has its own shorthands to make it faster and easier to read. In the above example, we use the price of a sandwich to calculate sales tax. After calculating the tax, we add it to the total price of the sandwich. Finally, we complete the transaction by reducing our money in wallet by the cost of the sandwich with tax. The instructions are this. We're trying to figure out how much it rained in the past year. Update to the annual rainfall variable to include the values from September to December. So January to June rainfall. So it has these numbers. And annual rainfall, it equals January to June rainfall. So then if I do another one, so I can then do September to December. September to December rainfall. Okay. So now that I've created that, I can then add all those numbers together. I accidentally put that there. So now that I'm back on the right one, I can then put the 4.06 and the annual rainfall should then be the January to June rainfall plus September to December rainfall. Okay. So to see it, let's just print it. And now let's see what the result is. But now there's an error in line 2. Okay, so let's check. Well, there's a name error and it says it isn't defined. So the error is probably that is probably how it is. So I'm going to copy this and replace that. Now let's see now. But it still says it isn't defined. I just figured out the reason. The reason it isn't defined is because it says it should plus before it's actually defined. So you have to make sure if you're going to use it, you have to put it there first. So the answer is 45.21. Comment. Most of the time, code should be written in such a way that it's easy to understand on its own. However, if you want to include a piece of information to explain a part of your code, you can use the hashtag sign. A line of text preceded by a hashtag, it's called a comment. The machine does not run this code. It is only for humans to read. When you look back at your code later, comments may help you figure out what it was intended to do. Add a comment above the declaration of city pop with a description of what you think the variable contains. So I'm going to guess that the city population is there. Okay, the city pop is probably just the city population. Okay. Okay, so city pop means the city population. I'm going to run that. And as you can see, it doesn't affect anything. Numbers. Variables can also hold numeric values. The simplest kind of number in Python is the integer, which I've mentioned, which is a whole number with no decimal point. A number with a decimal point is called a float. You can define float with numbers after the decimal point, or just by including a decimal point at the end. So these are the same things, except for float free and integer free. Minus 5.5, there's a decimal. 10 point, there's a decimal there. 1.0, that's equal to 1, and 10 with a decimal point at the end is equal to 10. You can also define the floats using scientific notation, with E indicating the power of 10. You are going shopping. Let's make a grocery list so that you can plan your budget. Store the number of cucumbers you want to buy in a variable called cucumbers. Make sure it's at least 1, and that's the appropriate data type. The store doesn't sell partial cucumbers. So we don't want a float. So let's do one called cucumbers. And let's make it 4. Each cucumber costs 3.25 doubloons. Store the price per cucumber in the variable called price per cucumber. Okay, so I'm going to have that. So if they cost 3.25 doubloons each, it's then going to be cucumbers times is 3.25. And the reason I'm doing it like the variable cucumbers is because that way we'll be able to change variable cucumbers, and it'll then end up changing this. We also need to make sure that we put this one first, or else it won't know that the cucumbers exist. And I accidentally went one step ahead of it on calculating how much it all costs. So now the total cost is what I was doing before. So I'm going to do that, and it's going to be cucumbers times price per cucumber. Okay, so, I meant to put cucumbers. So now we're able to print out the total cost. And it's 13 right there. So it's actually a float. But if you don't, but it can also end up being an integer instead. Yeah. We're going to move on. Two types of division. In Python 2, when we divide two integers, we get an integer as a result. When the quotient is a whole number, this works fine. So as the quotient 6 divided by 2, that works fine. However, if the numbers do not divide evenly, the result of the division is truncated into an integer. In other words, the quotient is rounded down to a whole number. This can be surprising when you expect to receive a decimal and you receive a rounded down integer. To yield a float as a result, instead, programmers often change either the numerator or denominator or both to be a float. An alternative way is to use a float method. You have come home from the grocery store with 100 cucumbers to split among yourselves and your 5 roommates, 6 people in total. Create a variable cucumbers that holds 100 and number of people that holds 6. So cucumbers equals 100 this time. And the number of people holds 6. Okay. But it has to be cucumbers. It is very exact about what it should be spelled like. Create a variable called numbers of cucumbers per person. That is the integer result of dividing cucumbers by number of people. Print whole cucumbers per person to console. Okay. So I'm going to create that. So it's going to equal cucumbers divided by the number of people. And I need to remember to put that S. And I've also forgotten to print it, even though I accepted that. So I'm going to take the variable and put it there to print. So it's 16. Now I need to define another variable. And this is something you should usually do. Put the variables at the top so that you won't end up listing them when they aren't actually done. And like make sure they're there before they're created. Okay. So now it's going to be the float number of cucumbers per person. It's going to hold the float result of this. I'm also going to remove this hashtag. So now that I put that there, I'm going to change one of them to a float. So now that that one's a float, which should then do it. I'm also going to put this here so I can have float. And I'm feeling, so now it's saying that it isn't actually there. So I'm going to just see what's wrong with this because it says it isn't defined. Oh, I forgot to put, there's actually no whole part. So now it should work. And that's a float result. Multi-line strings. We have seen how to define a string with single quotes and with double quotes. If we want a string to span multiple lines, we can also use triple quotes. This address spans multiple lines and is still contained in one variable. When a string like this is not assigned to a variable, it works as a multi-line comment. This can be helpful as your code gets more complex. Create a variable called haiku and store this haiku as a multi-line string. So that should be easy. Just haiku equals, so there's going to be the multi-line string. So then I can put here. And I can then put the haiku in. The old pond, a frog jumps in. Let me just put some spaces. And then I can just put plot. So now that's a variable there with the multi-line in the string. And remember, it can also be used for a comment. Booleans. Sometimes we have the need for variables that are either true or false. This data type, which can only ever take one of two values, is called a Boolean. In Python, we define Booleans using the keywords true and false. A Boolean is actually a special case of an integer. A value of true corresponds to an integer value of 1 and will behave the same. A value of false corresponds to an integer value of 0. Someone has introduced themselves to you using comments in script Python. Read the comments and then create a variable called age is 12 and set it to be true or false depending on this person's age is 12. Well, it's actually 21, so I'm going to set it to false. So I have that as a variable, and I'm going to set it to false. I'm pretty sure it would even accept a true, or it's actually just set to, but thinking of false. Create a variable called name is Maria and set it to be true or false depending on if this person's name is Maria. And it says it right here that their name is Maria, so I'm going to put it to true. So Now that that's, I'm going to set it to true. And we're going to move on to the next one. Value error. Python automatically assigns a variable to the appropriate data type based on the value it is given. A variable with the value 7 is an integer. 7 with a decimal point is a float, and 7 in quotation marks is a string. Sometimes we want to convert variables to different data types. For example, if we wanted to print out an integer as part of a string, we would need to convert that integer to a string first. We can do that using the string command. So, as we saw near the beginning, there's the plus. This is where you put on both sides and make sure to put spaces in the middle. And you put out a string, and that's age. And since it's a string, it's going to add itself in. Similarly, if we have the string 7 and we want to perform arithmetic operations on it, we must convert it to a numeric data type. We can do this using integer. So like it did with string, it can then turn it into an integer. If we have a string that has a floating point value, such as 7.5, we can convert it to a numeric data type using float instead. Using float on an integer value, whether string or numeric, will convert the value to a float. The result of using integer on a floating point value will depend on whether the value is a string or numeric data type. If you use integer on a floating point string value, it will raise a value error. So as you can see, this will be the error. Using integer on a floating point numeric value converts the number to an integer by removing the decimal portion and rounding the number closer to 0. Note, use caution when converting a floating point number into an integer, as this may result in the loss of the decimal data. Create a variable called product that contains the result of multiplying the float value of floating. So I have to make sure it's after they're defined. So product equals float 1 times float 2. Create a string called big string that says the product was X with the value of product where the X is. So I'm going to put big string, and it's going to equal so the string is now started, and it's going to do the product was, and I'm going to have a space there and then do a plus. And I'm going to use a string to then turn the product into a string, so that's going to be put there. And I'm also going to print it. So now that that's there, we'll be able to see the product was 10. Review. Great. So far, we've looked at print statements, how to create, modify, and use variables, arithmetic operations like addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication, how to use comments to make your code easy to understand, different data types, including strings, integers, floats, and Booleans, converting between data types. There are a few more resources to add to your toolkit, which we're not going to do here. Make sure to bookmark these links so that you have them at your disposal. You can choose to do that. Let's apply all of the concepts you have learned at one time. Create a variable called skill completed and set it equal to the string Python syntax. So I'm going to have that skill completed and it's going to equal to what it says Python syntax. And I'm also going to make sure to change that P to I'm going to make sure to change the P and the S to capital so that I won't go like that isn't how it's supposed to be. Create a variable called exercises completed and set it to equal to 13. Create another variable called points per exercise and set it to equal to 5. So exercises completed. I need to make sure to start a new line. Okay, so I now have that, and I'm going to set it to 13 points per exercise. It's going to equal 5. So if we run it, it'll then put that, and I accidentally put a space between those. And you aren't supposed to have spaces in variables. That's why that's there. Create a variable called point total and set it equal to 100. So far, all the one that, okay, so far there's 3 integers and 1 string. Update point total to be the original value plus the result of multiplying in the exercises completed and points per exercise. Okay, so I'm going to update that. Point total equals point total. Wait. Plus exercises completed times points per exercise. Okay, so and I accidentally put pins. 65 point total is 65 when it should be 165. And I accidentally put another equals when I meant to put a plus. Add a comment above your declaration of points per exercise that says the amount of points for each exercise may change because points don't exist yet. Okay. So now I have that, I can then run it and print a string to the console that says I got X points with a variable point total where the X is. So I can then go print I got, and you make sure to put a space there, and it's going to be plus string points total plus another string with a space at the beginning, points. I got 165 points. but I ended up getting one of it wrong. And even though it still works, it wants me to put the pluses together. And it mainly just wants me to not have any space between them. And it wants me to put an exclamation mark. Why does it have to be so specific? So now we've finished that one, and that's all that we're going to do for now. But we're soon going to be moving on to the next lesson. And we don't actually need to start a free trial. So now we've completed Python syntax. And that's all we need to do. So we're done here, and that's all from me.